We talk a lot in this industry about the grid of the future and the technical capabilities that are required to enable it. But we don't always talk about the strategic mindset that's required to actually build it. Specifically, the framework that shapes how a utility decides when to build a custom solution, when to buy off the shelf tech, and how to adopt these tools so they actually can scale. Today's guest is somebody who has lived that evolution from the ground up. Andy Quick spent nearly 30 years at Entergy, which was a journey that culminated in him serving as the utility's first ever chief AI officer. In that role, he wasn't just chasing the latest shiny object, he was the architect of a department focused on measurable value creation, as well as the AI literacy required for the workforce to move from pilot to production. Today, Andy has taken that experience to the edge of the grid as a senior industry advisor for Noteworthy AI. He's now helping utilities navigate the how and when of tech integration, helping them move past the hype to make hard choices about which tools are going to truly modernize their efforts and processes. So, Andy, thanks so much for taking the time to connect.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So, I briefly touched on your career at Entergy that spanned nearly 3 decades, but, looking back on that, was there a single most disruptive shift or change that you saw in the wider industry, or was it more about gradual changes that culminated in that final role that was very AI focused?
Yeah, I would have said before AI came along, sort of the transition to clean energy seemed to be quite the big disruption. But then AI kind of walked into the room, and it became definitely number one from a disruption perspective with the AI data centers that were coming in. And so the ability for utilities to be able to respond to that demand from these hyperscalers from both a transmission and generation perspective, never seen anything like it. And it really became front and center as the disruptor. And utilities are going to have to respond because the market demands it.
Well, and it's both sides of AI, isn't it? It's the demand that's coming from the Amazons of the world, but then also AI as a tool. What does it mean for a utility to consider how they're using AI? So, I mean, it's across the board.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think utilities really need to, and it will take time. You made the comment about things take time gradually. I think the adoption and integration of AI into utilities at scale or kind of in a big way is going to take, it's going to be gradual. It's going to take quite a number of years.
Well, and that I imagine that was your focus as chief AI officer. I mean, you formed a new AI department that was focused on value creation and AI governance. What can you say about the approach that you took to the creation of that department and how it was designed to support and integrate with the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I wish at the time because we were it was early days. I wish that there was a blueprint that I had or some sort of examples, that I could look to be successful. But the the what we tried to do was answer three critical questions. Number one is how do we create material value with AI? How do we actually create value with AI in a significant way? Number one, how do we enable the organization to take advantage of all these great new tools to improve productivity? So that's two. And then three was how do we make sure we're not running with scissors? How do we deal with the potential risks associated with some of these AI tools back when, I mean, it's come a long way, even since around 2023, there was a lot of unknowns. Things came out and we didn't know what we didn't know. So three pillars, or one is kind of top down, how from sort of top of the company down, what are some big opportunities to use AI to make a significant difference to high level objectives of the company and goals, to how do we bottoms up create organic innovation from everybody in the organization because people come up with really, really cool ways to use AI. So you need that bottoms up piece of it. And then three, how do we make sure we do it in a way that mitigates the potential risks associated with some of these models?
No, it really makes sense, and it ties into. I was going to ask you about whether it makes sense for utilities to kind of start a kind of an independent AI department that explores some of these opportunities, or whether it made more sense as part of individual departments. But I think that's almost the wrong question. Like it's more about that value creation, as you said. Like what problem are you trying to solve, rather than what technology are you trying to integrate?
Yeah, yeah, and I get that question. I mean, there's probably three or four questions since I've left and have become sort of independent advisor. I get the same kind of set of questions, and one of them always is, well, How does this thing need to exist within the organization? And the answer is anything can work. Anything really can work. Models where it's in the IT function, if it's an independent AI function, if it's scattered, if it's a center of excellence, on paper, you can come up with all kinds of different frameworks, org models to support AI, but that's not really what's most important. What's most important is where in the organization do you want to cluster any AI capabilities um, such that it's going to have the greatest um, ability to influence change? Because create material value, creating material value equals change. It's all about change. And for an organization to really transform how they work, even in an individual workflow, individual department, transform and that how people work and integrate AI is going to require change. And some of these processes and utilities are very old, right? This is very institutionalized, ingrained, fossilized, however you want to describe it. And it's really hard to go from here's something we've been doing for 20 years to doing it completely differently with AI. Total disruption. That's the hard part. So the question should be who in the organization at a high enough level is going to be able to influence that level of change, both initially to get win people's hearts and minds and then sustain it over time. So that's the more important question than, well, should it be its own thing or should it be in IT or should you have something distributed? It's more about who can influence change in the organization. That's you want to find your champion because it's the change that's the challenge, not the technology.
Well, and I imagine that that's a similar answer to the build versus buy question. Another one that you probably get all the time, whether it makes sense for utility to develop this tool internally in a way that they have control over it and then can connect it to their specific processes versus something they buy off the shelf. And it's Andy, which one should we do? It's like, well, it depends on, I'm sure you have how many follow-up questions for that. And
Yeah.
but too, like, I mean, we can get into that, but what are some of the things that, when you get those questions, what's being underestimated on the utility side in terms of what it means to do either of those things?
Right, right. And another question I do get all the time is buy versus build. I always like to back up the bus a little bit and say, okay, before you even enter into the buy versus build, have you found a problem we're solving? Do you understand the level of disruption and change that's going to go into that? And do you have the support from a change management perspective to make that change happen? Because if you don't, it doesn't matter whether you buy or build. It's kind of a kill switch in my mind. And so I kind of back up a little bit. If you get to the point where, yeah, this is a problem we're solving, we understand what the change is going to be required, we've got good sponsorship, we think we really want to solve this problem, we have money, discretionary capital to invest to do something, then it becomes that then you can filter it through number one, what's the speed to value? How do we get the benefit the fastest? Right? I always put speed at the top. How fast can you realize the benefits? Um, number one. Two is the economics, right? Layout. Well, first of all, is has the market solved the problem, right? Has the market there? I work with utilities, but I also work with startups, and everybody is solving problems with AI, right? It's everywhere. So first step is, has this problem been solved? Um, and is there something that exists? If it does, then I'd look at the economics of buy versus build, because if there's a market solution, if there's a company that has a solution to the problem, they have spent millions of dollars and probably years building the solution, the platform they have to solve that problem. So you will take that long, probably at least that many millions, at least that amount of years to reach feature parity with whatever that solution is. And by the time you got there, they've moved on and they've got their solution is even better. So, it doesn't make any sense necessarily to build your own when the market has answered for it because it's going to take you a long time to get to that point. So I always start with value. Secondly is another thing to think about. Well, yeah, that's the economics a second. Thirdly is integration. That can really bite people in the back because you think about, look, here's this nice tool. It does all these things. It sounds great. But utilities have many, many legacy systems and legacy processes. And how is it going to really fit in? And sometimes that can be a real challenge. So I always advise make sure you talk about integration with a provider kind of upfront. Now, if there isn't a solution out there, if the problem hasn't been solved, then you're in, hey, we're in novel territory to solve maybe a new problem that hasn't been solved by the market. And then you want to evaluate what would it actually take, to create that. And I'd always recommend working with a partner to be able to do that. So if you are going to go on a journey on building, I'd recommend partnering with somebody. And I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons I teamed up with the Noteworthy AI team, because it's all kind of it's visual inspection. It's already pre-built. They've used this, they've put it in a camera, you stick it on a truck, it integrates with everything, lights up your GIS, and you can start doing inspection right away. And there's nothing like really novel or new about it. These AI models can do visual inspection, right? The off-the-shelf visual model. So, building your own in that particular case doesn't make sense. However, if it's a novel process, if it's something that's unique, if the problem has been solved, then the question is, all right, let's look at the economics of building and does it make sense? And does it overcome the benefits that's required? Because maybe it's not worth it.
Well, and it strikes me that there's a middle ground here, and maybe Noteworthy AI might be a good example of it, but that it's not about identifying this problem that a utility has and saying there's literally no one else dealing with this out in the universe, which is probably unlikely anyways.
Yeah,
But like
right.
there's specific instance of it, is there a tool that can be customized or utilized in a specific way that helps them solve a specific problem? And this piece of software that does that, they're out there.
Yeah, it's out there. Absolutely. Just put the camera on the truck and you're good to go. And it's minimal integration and so forth. And there's other examples that, don't try to solve the problem the market's already solved. The other customer service is another area. The amount of money that's going into any sort of customer facing interactions, voice or chat, there's a lot out there. And, I wouldn't recommend utility go try and create their own or build their own anything to do with customer interactions. Because that problem is being attacked and solved by many, many players out there in the market.
Well, it goes back to what you said about process. And I mean, ultimately, process isn't really about technology. It's about people. It's about systems. It's about legacy and like what it means to understand how all of that is currently working, much less how you want to change it. As you said, like that. Again, there's no one answer to that, but having those champions identify that and work through that, like that's the work, that's the job. But that concept of champions, I wanted to ask you about that because
Mhm.
where do those come from, or how do they form, and what level are they at? I imagine the CTO is thinking, I've got to find an engineer that understands this in a way that I can support how they can change their processes. But then on the other side of that engineer is thinking, I can't make this happen because I'm not the CTO of the company.
Yeah, it's finding those champions, I would say is more art than science. Let me just say that. It isn't like there isn't a formula for that. What I would say is, again, the premise is for a utility who wants to realize material value from a discretionary investment in AI, whatever that might be, finding a senior leader who is very passionate around solving a particular problem. Like we've got to make somebody who has got the right shoulder bars, high enough in the organization, banging fist on table. We have got to solve this problem. This thing is taking us too long. It's costing us too much. We keep getting, bit from we get experience this risk event. I mean, whatever the categorization of the problem or the flavor of the problem, however, by solving it has material benefits and somebody senior in the organization, the more senior, the better, who's got influence, direct or indirect, who really wants to solve the problem. That's that that is the critical success factor. I get the other question I get all the time is why do AI projects fail? And how do I find a winning use case? Right? The answer, it's two sides of the same coin. It's finding that leader that really, 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 really has that passion to solve the problem. That is your key, your gateway to a successful, AI investment, because you have somebody that really wants to back up solving the problem and who will want to change, right? Who want to actually change. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of small use cases. The other question, why do all these pilots fail, or they become experiments and they go away? Well, you pick something too small, or you pick something that, requires very, very little change, because the amount of value is directly proportional to the amount of change. The more you're willing to change, the more value you're going to get. If you're saying, well, I'm going to make this step in a process easier for me, well, that's going to not have significant value, right?
And have you seen that happen where maybe at that lower level, at that manager level or project manager level, that there somebody has identified a problem that can be solved, but they don't have that leadership kind of hammer to make it happen, but they're able to lay out their case, maybe able to outline here's how this can work in a small way, here's how this can work at scale. And I mean that's a path to turn them into one of those leaders.
All the time, all the time. And there are people, in organizations who, doesn't matter what level, or even sub-manager level, doesn't matter. And I know some engineers that had some just brilliant ideas. Um, and they might be in the organization where they don't have any influence, right? And I think that's where an AI function within an organization can help. And that's, again, that's why, from a strategy perspective, I always recommend having that bottoms up mechanism. Yeah, you're giving employee tools, but you're also creating a community, right? Like creating an AI community, so that those individuals who've got those great ideas, they have some sort of structured space to come communicate, promote, market their idea. Then whatever AI function exists, wherever it exists within the organization, that's a way to say, okay, let's help put this on a pedestal, right? Let's help get this idea exposure, help elevate it. So to be an AI function, a team, chief AI officer, whatever it is to be a catalyst for those ideas, to be able to say, because whoever's doing AI probably is hired in the organization, to be able to say, hey, executive team, have I got an idea for you? Joe, the engineer, has this idea to yada, 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 whatever this is in the organization. And then the AI functions role is to really help promote and support elevation, exposure of that idea that may otherwise just sit on the, you know, sit in the queue and never get any sort of attention. But it happens
Well,
all the time.
and it's similar. Like there's no easy button with that, as you said. There's no defined path, but I mean, really about making connections across levels, whether that's top down, bottom up, and having an understanding of what it means to connect into and support that. Which again is just going to depend on the utility, depend on the people, depend on
Yeah.
the established processes.
There was one example I can think of. There was an engineer who had a really, really great idea, and kind of we collaborated with him to sort of expand the thinking a little bit. And we were talking to the very top of the company about that idea. You know what I mean? And our role, and I would say, whatever the AI function looks like within utility, is help be a call it a funnel, a pathway, to be able to expose and promote those ideas, because it might get traction.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about is cost, and it's not just about economics, but opportunity cost as well. So, how should utilities think about the full economics of that build versus buy question as an upfront cost? But then as well, what is the answer there ultimately mean, or how does it impact the opportunity cost of doing one or either?
I love that question, because I always go to opportunity cost first. And that's where I would start, actually, because back to the sort of the prioritization, back to my prioritization comment, the pathway to success is through disciplined prioritization. That is to me the answer to ensure success and prevent failure. And looking at, one, what is the problem we're solving, and looking at desirability first. I like the model of desirability, viability, and feasibility. Desirability goes back to what we talked about before: is the problem we're solving, does somebody want to go solve it? Somebody senior organization banging their fist on the table, like, we are gonna fix this. We're gonna solve this. We're gonna do this. And have that passion that can influence change. If you don't have that desirability, it's kind of like a kill switch. It doesn't really matter. You're almost guaranteed to fail if you don't have that. And I hate to say that again. If you're chasing a larger prize here, right? You really need that support. Second is viability, which is really the economics, right? And we'll get into the build buy question. I'll come back to your question, I promise. It's like, well, what does the economics look like? Whether you build or buy, what is it going to be? Is do the benefits outweigh the costs and the risks of doing this project? And then last is feasibility, which is all the techie stuff, which is what a lot of people want to start with. They want to start with, we don't have enough data. We don't have enough data. We don't have enough quality data. Um, and tools and technologies. And what about that model? Will it do it or not? And it's ironic. It's the tail wagging the dog. You should start, to me, that's the order of desirability, looking at the leader's desire to solve the problem. Two, viability is around the economics, cost benefits. And third is, can you technically put it together? I almost never see technology being the wall, and even data. Yeah, you may need to get some data as part of the project, or you may need to clean up some data. You may need to consolidate some data, but a lot of people want to feel like, oh, we need to get all our data straight before we can do anything. I hear that all the time. And I'd encourage not thinking that way. Assume that you can figure it out on a case by case basis, but don't try to boil the ocean. Back to the buy versus build on the economics. Take a moment to really chart out, okay, what does the journey look like if I'm buying? What does the journey look like if I'm building? And all the components that go into that, both upfront cost, ongoing cost, and then also including, any sort of integrations that may be required and further within your organization. Because sometimes when you buy a solution, there might be other parts within your organization where investments might have to be made and sustained, whether it's in security, whether it's in legacy system integration. So you have to look at all those things. Um, Same thing with building. You have to look at, okay, well, how are what's the upfront cost and how are you going to sustain this and kind of cash flow it out, you know? Um, but again, if the market has solved the problem, very likely the buy path is going to prove out to be more economical, um, because they've already made a ton of investment. They've already built the thing. So,
Well, I just love that concept of starting with the opportunity cost because it goes back to the work to quantify the invisible that we talked about. Like there's no easy button with any of this, but what does it mean to understand how to change culture or how to change process? And like there's you can't quantify that in a way that, as you said, like let's start with the data. That's something tangible. That's something we can get our arms around. But like
mhm.
the a culture of change that we have or don't have, how do you quantify that in the context of this opportunity cost? And like that's messy, that's hard, but like that is, I imagine that's a metric of success that enables change.
It's number one. And it's interesting because, um, I've spent my whole career integrating technology with business process and change. And I learned through whether it's AI, whether it's, advanced data analytics, data science, robotic process automation, legacy IT stuff, it doesn't matter. It's the same lesson I keep learning over and over again. It's all about change. Value comes from change. AI is just really another tool in the tool belt, right? That can do a lot of amazing things. But when you boil it down, you're transforming process with technology to harvest material value. And to be able to do that requires change. And so that's the critical success factor, is confronting the change required to realize that value. And if you sweep that under the rug, it'll come get you. I mean, it'll show up, right? Well, it's not like you can avoid it. The question is, do you want to address it up front? And if before you take the first step on a project and you're really confronting up front, you're maximizing your chance of success. You are maximizing your chance of success, as you're deciding, what you're going to go do.
What have you seen succeed in terms of changing some of those mindsets so that it is more about the process, it is more about the opportunity cost rather than the data or rather than tool? I mean, and you said it, like the technology itself is rarely the barrier. Like the technology is there, the technology can work, the technology can be integrated, it can be developed. But what does somebody need to, somebody that is starting from that data place and thinking, oh, we need to get all of our ducks in the row data wise before we can do anything. It's like, all right, well, I'll see you in 8 years.
Yeah. Well, and so what I say is, okay, let's imagine what that journey is going to look like for you, who is thinking about data and so forth. You know, how long is that going to take? And what are you going to respond to when you're asked? Because you will, depending on where you are in the organization. What are we doing with AI and what benefits are we getting? And you have to decide what battles you're going to want to pick. And the answer just can't be we're we're getting our data straight because that's going to take years and years and years because bad data is created by humans. So as long as there's humans, hands on keyboards generating data, bad data is gonna it's never going to go away. And and also people generally outside of people that are in the data world, like whether it's chief data officer or people, an AI person like me, who cares about data and sees the value of good, high volume, curated, clean, modeled data. A lot of people don't care about that in their day to day, right? And getting other people to, who are doing their day to day jobs to really care. It's hard to build that ownership. So net of it is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to go do and go on that journey. Just it takes a very, very long time. And as the person that's promoting AI adoption or driving change with AI, ask yourself, well, what's going to happen in a couple of years when you really don't have anything to show for integrating AI into your enterprise? And so where do you really want to start? And data is like you said, it's the easy place because everybody has a lot of data and everybody has a lot of bad data and everybody is concerned about bad data. I'm not saying it's not a legitimate business concern because it is. Um, but there are plenty of use cases out there where back to the desirability, viability, and feasibility is find that use case that you've got good data and you've got enough of it to go solve the problem. You've got executive support and leadership. And so, marry it together. Think of it as like a Venn diagram. It's like, hey, you want to hit all those things. So you want high desirability, high viability, high feasibility. And there might be some use cases where you have some crappy data and you don't want to go chase solving the problem. You may solve something else. Back to opportunity cost. Is there a better thing to go do because it's more feasible from a data perspective?
Well, there's that old expression about the perfect being the enemy of the good. The
Yes.
perfect data might be the enemy of the bad data. I don't know.
Yeah,
We can
yeah. It,
we
it
can start
applies.
out.
It very much applies.
Cool. Well, is there one development or trend in the energy sector that you're most excited to see take shape this year? Can be AI related. I know you had said AI as, just thinking of AI as a tool, which I think is really instructive and something that is changing before our eyes. I mean, it's being positioned as this whole different thing, and in some ways it is, but in a lot of other ways it isn't.
Yeah, the one thing I'm really watching is getting AI into the field. I think that's a really, really big opportunity for utilities, and really, really in the field. Like I talked about the Noteworthy guys, they've got a good solution in the field, very little integration. Get going, start using AI for inspection. I think it's great. But even the worker in the field, whether it's especially in distribution, if you look at how utilities, from a work management perspective, field work, I think there's a great opportunity to integrate AI into the day-to-day of distribution employees to make their lives easier and more efficient. Have AI help them be more productive and do more hands-on work because there's a lot of administrivia and bureaucracy that exists in utilities in general and in the distribution field work that occurs. I think there's a great opportunity to disrupt that with AI, and it's something that I'm keeping my eyes on. And I'm hopeful, again, back to your gradual change question, change happens extremely gradually at utilities. So I don't think you'll see a switch flip in a year and see this AI-enabled field productivity show up. But I think the opportunity is very significant. The other one is in the regulatory space and the efficiency in rate making. I think that's another big area of disruption that is a really significant opportunity, both for utilities and public service commissions. I think both can really, really benefit from improving rate making, whether that's traditional rate making or formula rate plans, whatever the construct is. I think all utilities, big and small, and all PSCs have an opportunity to embrace AI to make that rate making process much more efficient. So something I'm watching and I'm hoping will be disrupted with AI.
Well, and in both cases, I mean, getting it out into the field makes a ton of sense. And as it does that, it's not necessarily about completely changing or upending a process, but about making processes that are currently inefficient in a way that the people involved that don't really realize. And like that, I imagine that that's going to be eye-opening.
Yeah, and I think from an employee perspective, it's a great opportunity to, lower the sort of non-field work, right? The wrench time and sort of doing the actual job of doing the line work. I think people much more prefer to do that work that they were trained to do versus typing stuff on a keyboard in a system and maintaining records and reports and, you know, interfacing with those legacy systems.
Excellent. Well, Andy, last question for you, and we can keep it in the energy sector or pull all the way out, but tell me something powerful.
I would say insofar as it applies to AI in energy and utilities, I would say think big. Think really, really big. And don't be afraid of the unknowns and know that there's a lot of learning that industry is going through right now, and there are knowns and unknowns. And if you really want to make an impact within your utility, think big and assume that AI can do anything you want it to do, but think very, very big about the kind of problems you want to solve and shoot for the moon and don't think small, think big.
I like big thinking. I like big thinkers. Andy Quick, really appreciate you taking the time. We'll stay in touch with all the work I know you're doing with the Noteworthy folks, and looking forward to staying connected.
All right, great to connect. Thank you.